10C, receive a report and provide direction regarding the selection process for appointing directors to the board of the San Bruno Community Foundation.
Yeah. I think so. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all right. Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, there are three main topics for tonight's discussion. The first one is to receive a report from the Council Subcommittee regarding the selection process for the board of the San Bruno Community Foundation. The second topic is going to be to review and hopefully approve the board member job descriptions that are attached to your staff report. And the third topic is to provide direction regarding the selection process for the board members. Let me just take just a second to talk a little bit about the subcommittee meeting that was held last week. The subcommittee did attend. Staff was there, as well as Mary Ellen Loyens from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. She developed the job descriptions for the board members that you see attached to your packet. It was felt that those job descriptions were important to have, although you'll look at the content of them this evening, so that applicants will basically know what they're getting into. They're going to be in charge of a very large fund with significant responsibilities. They're not going to earn compensation. There's going to be very important duties and a large time commitment for them. And on top of all of that, they have to comply with state law governing both public entities and nonprofits. The subcommittee also discussed a potential outreach program to applicants by way of public announcements, posting in the usual places, personal contacts that the council members may wish to have, and possibly a public information session, as well as maybe advertising on the cable channel. So that was also discussed. Subcommittee also considered the possibility that the Silicon Valley Community Foundation would do an initial screening of the applicants and then make a recommendation either to the subcommittee or the full council for which applicants were qualified to fill those positions. The council would obviously retain full discretion to review all the resumes that are received, interview anybody they wished, and appoint anybody as they see fit. Before being seated on the board, another thing the subcommittee discussed is the applicants would have to undergo a standard background check. And then, assuming that they pass that check, the staff in the Silicon Valley Community Foundation would schedule an orientation session for the board members so they can understand more fully what all of their duties and responsibilities are. In terms of the schedule, as you'll see in the staff report, it's a bit tight, I think is perhaps an understatement. There's a firm deadline from the Secretary of State of October 22nd, and that's a result of the day that the Articles of Incorporation were filed. We actually waited as long as we could to file those Articles of Incorporation before the name San Bruno Community Foundation would expire, and we didn't want that to happen. So we're sort of moving toward the end of the process. So we do have until the 22nd for the council to make those board appointments and file that document. Fortunately, the document can be filed online, so we don't have to send anybody down to Sacramento to do it. So what staff has proposed is to receive applications from interested people, which would consist of a cover letter and a resume, by 5 p.m. on September 30th. And that would be by one of two means: either personal delivery to the clerk's office, Carol Bonner, who's right here, or an email to communitynonprofit@sanbruno.ca.gov. That's communitynonprofit@sanbruno.ca.gov. That's actually the website that the city has already set up and already received expressions of interest on that website for people who want to know about the San Bruno Community Foundation. The City Council, we're proposing, would conduct interviews by October 18th, recognizing that we do have to make appointments by the 22nd, and hopefully a little bit sooner if there's plenty of time to file. Looking even farther ahead, of course, the board will have a number of significant initial decisions to make, none the least of which will be hiring an executive director and determining how it's going to staff its operations. But those and many other things are things that the initial board will have to work on after their first meeting. So at this time, it would be appropriate, I think, to hear from the subcommittee if they have any comments, any members of the public if they'd like to say anything, discuss the job descriptions and the selection process, and then provide some direction to staff about how best to proceed now via a motion. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think I'd like to hear from the public first, if anyone has any comments or questions. Okay. Irene?
Thank you. I have a question about the background check. I'm not sure why that is part of this.
Well, we felt it was prudent simply because the board of directors will be handling what amounts to $70+ million, and we just want to make sure that we have some good actors on board. I think it's a prudent step when you're dealing with something this large.
But anything, they are not going to have access to like a check. But I mean, they're not going to have access to any of this. They're just going to make recommendations, do all those things. They're not going to actually handle any money.
We just thought it was a good idea to see what type of individual.
Members of the city council.
One moment. Are you
Okay.
finished, Irene?
I don't agree, but
Okay. All right. Michael, do you have a comment on that?
Only that we were told it's fairly typical
Yeah.
for appointees to this type of a board. So it wouldn't be uncommon for somebody on a nonprofit board to have to go through that.
no, I've been on several and never had to. So
Okay. Okay. Tell us your name and street.
My name is Noelle Ruane, and I believe that background checks are very important when you're handling large sums of money, because recently in the paper, I would say in the last year, if you read a newspaper, there have been many embezzlements, and they've been on the county, the city, and the state level. And if we do this up front, it saves us a lot of grief. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
I would
Irene?
just like to clarify, and for the audience, members of the public, the board members themselves are never going to handle any money. They don't have it. They won't be writing checks. They won't be have access to the money itself. They'll be doing budgets. They'll be making recommendations. They'll be doing all those things. The city council will review those things, and the executive director will be handling, and the finance director, whoever else is involved with that, will be actually handling money. It's similar in structure to the city council. We have a budget, we direct spending of millions and millions of dollars. We don't go through a background check. So it's kind of, partly because it says in here it would delay everything for several weeks. It could delay things for several weeks, and we're under a tight time crunch. So that's my concern.
If I
To the
may,
chair.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry. No, the only thing, on the background checks, and staff can correct me, the several weeks depends upon how many counties the applicant may live in. So I've lived in San Mateo County my whole life. So the background check would probably be more expedited. If I've lived in 5 different counties in the last 7 years, then of course they have to go to the counties and pull that data. And I'm assuming it would be for felonies. Is it misdemeanors? Or I guess what does standard mean? But I'm in favor of having not only the credit and the standard criminal background. It's true, we don't go through that, but we also go through an election process, and we are placed out there before the public at time of election to either be reaffirmed to continue on in our seats or to have somebody else. So for what this is and what it is doing and dealing with, I want to see it done right, and I want to have the right board in place.
Okay. And Mark, did you have a comment?
Just a brief one to add a bit of context to the background check. That was something that we weren't necessarily expecting to hear from the experts that we've retained to help us out with a process that is new to us. What we've learned and confirmed is that board members themselves, under state law, are personally responsible for the distribution of the assets of the organization irrespective of whether the city council has retained powers, whether there's an executive director, whether there's staff doing it. And so they maintain and have personal responsibility for those. In addition, we've also learned that in the non-profit world of distributing funds, as this would be, there are a number of organizations, themselves nonprofits, who are, I think, for lack of a better term, watchdog entities that regularly review and evaluate other nonprofits on aspects of their transparency, on aspects of their governance, and those sorts of things. And one of the things that they would look at is how were the board members selected, and of course, if there's a process that is standard to be used, which we've been told it is, to have board members have these background checks, that would be something that those organizations might take into consideration. So the reason for that recommendation was that we, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, felt strongly that was an important aspect to ensure the integrity of the organization, both initially for the initial board and then into the future.
Ken?
Through the chair, I'm all in favor of that. I'm also concerned about what the subcommittee discussed as far as determining qualified applicants. Obviously, someone's going to submit an application and a resume, and they may have a list of qualifications and organizations that they've been with before. To what extent will that be checked? I mean, I would think that there'd be references and some, viable means of, verifying that this person actually did participate in another organization, and, and to verify what they actually did and what their performance was.
Right, that's a
and
good
the level
question.
of knowledge.
We didn't specifically, I don't remember talking about that specifically, but I would assume that that reference check would be part of the background that's done routinely as a result of the selection process.
I would expect that also.
Yeah, and I would recommend that when we develop this application, that the better, the more contact information they have to key people that will vouch for them, and a detailed description of what their duties have been in these other organizations that actually qualifies them.
Thank you.
Good. Anything else? We're looking to introduce a resolution.
So there is no resolution
Oh, I'm
in the
sorry, I'm
packet.
looking at the next
Right,
one.
what
Sorry,
we're
we
looking
should-
for is a motion to approve the job description. I did note, and I apologize, we found an error in the job description at about 4:30 this afternoon. The very last sentence on the very last page of the job description, where it says that the treasurer is going to participate as a member of the audit committee, turns out the treasurer can't be on the audit committee. So we apologize for that. We just caught that at the end. But otherwise, we're looking for a motion to approve that, and then to provide some direction to staff about what should the process be going forward. Do you agree with what's in the staff report? And then how should the selection process go in terms of, once applications are received, who should initially vet those, and how would we proceed from there?
Okay.
If I could
Ken?
just add one more thing. On the job description, it just seems that the board secretary should have some connection with the executive director as far as, records and things, and just doesn't seem that that's included. I mean, in the other offices, you have supervising the executive director, working with the executive director. The treasurer works with the executive director with financial records, but it seems that the secretary is sort of on their own.
Oh, I see. You're noting that it doesn't say that the board secretary would have to work with the executive director.
Well, I would think that the executive director would also be a custodian of some of the records also.
Well, I think the entity ultimately is the custodian of the records. I think the board secretary is responsible for maintaining them. So that's what we tried to capture in the description there.
All right.
Okay.
Are there any other comments about the job description or do we have a motion to approve those with those changes?
All right.
I'm prepared to make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
All right, so then the next question is, perhaps the council could provide us with some direction in terms of the selection process itself. What we recommended in the staff report is that we would receive these applications by the 30th, 5 o'clock, as I indicated. And then I think the key question for discussion is, do you want someone, Silicon Valley Community Foundation or staff or a combination thereof, to do an initial screen of those applications and then make a recommendation to you, the full council, regarding who they think is the most qualified, recognizing that you maintain complete discretion to interview anybody you want and select anybody you want.
I would agree with that, with the understanding that we have the option, as you said, to review all applications, regardless of whether you pick them or not.
Through the chair?
Michael?
I wanted to comment that while we were discussing that option, we were thinking that if there were a really large number of applicants, that would be a good way to impartially let the best applicants sort of filter to the top and then give us a smaller pool to select from, rather than us having to filter through each one and possibly bias the selection because we know somebody or because somebody may have lobbied us. So we kind of take that partiality away from the process, and we get the best candidates to vote on. And then at that point, we didn't really discuss beyond that how the actual selection of the top candidates would go, but I imagine it would be something like what we do with our normal appointments or what we do to fill vacancies otherwise. So that's kind of the thought process behind that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments regarding that?
I would just
part
agree
of
with the
the
Silicon Valley aspect with it understood. And if I can use you, Mark, as an example, but obviously somebody also who does this on a more routine basis went through, maybe gave us some ideas and suggestions. However, we still had the whole list to be able to review and differ or add to or et cetera. I think this would be important to have the impartiality, and as far as we talk about this, and everybody, it's a small town and we all tend to know individuals one way or the other. As they always say, somebody's connected somehow. So I think this would be the first good vetting process, with the understanding, though, of course, that we receive everything as a whole in the end.
Certainly, if the council determines to give us that direction, we would make sure that's abundantly clear.
Okay. Is everyone, Ken?
Well, and again, I mean, bringing up the verification of some of the references, is that going to be taken care of by Silicon Valley or prior to that, or, I mean?
Well, to be frank, we're still working out some of the time details in terms of when certain things are going to happen. Of course, we don't know how many applicants there are going to be. We could have 5, we could have 50. It's hard to say. So we're still working out those details, but we hope to get that vetting done as early as possible so that we don't have the background and reference checks holding up the process.
Yeah, and I don't want to give the impression that I'm not going to trust, whatever someone puts on an application, but they may not elaborate as much and just sort of say that they were involved in an organization or involved in a nonprofit, when in fact they probably just wasn't, they weren't part of a lot of the decision-making or involvement at all, so.
Well, and certainly if the full council is conducting interviews, they would, of course, be free to ask whatever questions they thought were important about a candidate's qualifications.
Okay. Any other questions? I think we have direction on that.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we stick with those dates. We got
Yeah, those
couple-
dates are
couple
okay
weeks
with
in between.
everybody?
No, I don't think we have a
Yeah.
choice on
No,
the
we don't have a
dates.
choice.
They are what they are.
Okay.
We'll do whatever we can to make sure it occurs
Okay.
as quickly, efficiently, and solidly as possible.
Good. Anything else?
I think that will do it. Thank you very
Through the
much.
chair?
Michael?
If we could maybe discuss the outreach process, and I'd like to get everybody else's thoughts on
Okay, good idea.
what we should be doing. In the staff report, it talked about putting stuff out on the website, and there aren't going to be any direct mailings to anyone, but if there are any other suggestions on what we might do to solicit applications from qualified applicants, I think that's one area where, especially because of the timing, the more aggressive we can be on that outreach, or having a good plan for making sure that we're attracting the best applicants. I think that's something we could definitely flesh out a little bit.
Good. Any ideas?
I was just going to say, we keep saying Silicon Valley. Do they have any thoughts or suggestions when staff or the subcommittee met as far as ways that they find the most effective and efficient? I'm asking.
Yeah, that's a good question. We didn't specifically discuss that. I think staff came up with the ideas that we have for you in the staff report, which is, posting, announcement on the cable system, obviously announcement at this meeting. We could certainly ask the mayor, for example, to make an announcement at the beginning of a subsequent city council meeting to make sure that goes out. It's correct, we didn't talk about any direct mailings to anybody, and then of course we talked about, we understand that there may be personal contacts between council members and individuals who might approach them who are interested, so.
I don't know what the time, excuse me, I don't know what the timeline is on focus. And as far as this deadline, it may not meet it, is my thought. I appreciate the normal routine and how we post things and how we announce it here or it's on Channel 1. I think we need to go way outside that box. And I think it's important that the groups that participate in this community, that we have maybe on rosters as far as various groups, they all obviously have a connection here. And I really think it's imperative that we go beyond that to a degree that's important that somebody says, yes, I did receive that, or I did hear about that, or I did pass that information on. I'd like to have it more saturated than going through the normal process or protocol that we sometimes do for maybe these meetings, as an example.
Right. Yeah, I heard the city clerk saying possibly putting this in the newspapers, maybe getting it out to the patch.
Yeah, I was going to suggest a
getting
press
some-
release.
We'll brainstorm that tomorrow morning and come up with some
Okay,
good
good.
ideas.
Thanks, Carol.
Yeah, I think one sort of disadvantage we have is that when a nonprofit would go out and solicit board members, they may look at people that are sitting on other boards and people that have other positions. But since we have some very specific requirements on our particular board, our pool is that much smaller, and I think because of that, we need to be a lot more aggressive in our recruitment.
Yeah, it's a hybrid, for sure, so.
All
All
right,
right.
thank you very much.
Good, okay, great.